Okay, we are about 5 minutes behind, so allow me to start the last session. The first speaker is from the University of Luxembourg, to be presented by Professor Jan Lagerwall, and his title is New Applications of cholesteric lipids by shaping them into shells. Okay. Welcome, Professor Lagerwall.
Thank you very much, Wei. Yes, let me first of all thank the organizers of this wonderful conference for the extraordinary organization, the fantastic reception I've had in China since I've landed. I'm going to bring back many beautiful memories to Europe. And of course, in general, this conference has been really, really nice. So what I would like to tell you about today is about two future application scenarios of what you're seeing in the background here, namely cholesteric liquid crystal shells that we've been thinking about. Actually, the talk will very much be related to a progress report that is just coming out any day now in Advanced Materials, where we are discussing several different types of future application scenarios. And I will be focusing on two of these, in security and in safety. And the first one, I think it's moving with these buttons. I want to use the phone. Okay, so the first one deals with authentication. And today we are getting more and more used to fingerprinting and using biometric for identifying ourselves. We use fingerprints all the time when we travel. Recently in Somaliland, there was the first election held where people were identifying, voters were identifying themselves using iris scans. And this works great for identifying people, but there is a huge problem if the database that is storing the biometric identifier is being hacked. And that's what this Wired article back in 2015 highlights. Because once your biometric identifiers are stolen, what should you do? Only mafia bosses can get their fingerprints replaced, and eye replacements, that's still only Minority Report. So a kind of secure authentication system that does not require storage of your biometric identifiers is really very useful. The other important thing that we are looking into is authentication of products. So on the one hand, authentication of people, but also products. And here I would like to highlight the meaning of counterfeit, because this is the issue here. We're not talking about a cheap, very obviously fake product that you can find in some back street in a big city. We're talking about fake products that are being sold at the price of the original, and you think you're buying the originals. And this is a really, really serious problem, because the products we're talking about are, for instance, pharmaceuticals, so it can be the difference between life and death. Kind of less serious, but after all, still quite interesting. Even pet food is being faked and marked as counterfeit pet food. This is cat food. Wines, a very lucrative industry, counterfeit wines. Also quite serious, electronics. Your memory card, can you really trust them if they're counterfeited memory cards? And one of the worst ones, in my opinion, even airplane parts are being counterfeited. So you probably trust your airline that they fly you home safely, and they probably do their best to fly you home safely. But if they are buying counterfeit spare parts without even knowing it, it's a serious issue. And it's not only a big safety issue, it's also an important issue for business. It's of course extremely difficult to evaluate the money involved in counterfeiting, but you can see here in this report from 2013 that there is a lot of money involved in counterfeiting. So if you can protect products from being counterfeited, it's a huge market issue as well. So I'm working together with Gabriele Lenzini at the University of Luxembourg. He's a computer scientist specializing in security on using cholesteric liquid crystal shells for authentication purposes. On the one hand, for authenticating persons, or on the other hand, for authenticating products. And in general, what we are proposing is that using cholesteric liquid crystal shells, we can generate tags that produce unique patterns, optical patterns, that are easy to evaluate but hard to predict. And they are easy to make, but basically we think impossible to duplicate, which of course is really what you want. if you want to do a secure authentication solution. So as I will show you, the cholesteric liquid crystal shells, or arrangements of cholesteric liquid crystal shells, provide a couple of interesting optical properties that can be used for this. So the second one is, so I've been talking about before about authentication for a while. We've been working on this for a couple of years. The second one is actually a brand new thing. You're the first audience I'm presenting this to. In this case, we are targeting a much larger scale issue, namely traffic, outdoor as well as indoor. The idea is to use cholesteric liquid crystal shells, or actually any kind of spherical liquid crystals, for specific reflectors to guide autonomous vehicles and robots. And to illustrate why this is an important issue, we can take this article from 2 weeks ago in Wired. You probably heard already that there have been a couple of pretty bad accidents with self-driving cars. This is actually the second one where the driver was killed. And you probably heard that Uber had a self-driving car that killed a pedestrian not too long ago. And what this illustrates is that we are rolling out a technology that actually is very, very good in terms of controlling the car, but the infrastructure just isn't there yet. It's simply not safe. And we think we can do something about this. And this is a quite interesting illustration. This is not only about so robots are self-driving cars, for instance, but you also have this type of robot from Boston Dynamics. So we're talking about robots on the road, but also robots indoors. And what I would like you to, sorry about that. What I would like you to notice here is that all these things that the robot is interacting with, they are QR coded. So if you look at the video here, right, every single thing, whether it's a door that is open or a box that it should take, it has QR codes. So the robot is enormously aided by having everything it should interact with labeled with a code. And QR codes, of course, are very useful at this type of research stage. But if you really want to roll out this on big, in real life, so to speak, then you probably don't want QR codes all around, right? And if you have a lot of things that are QR coded, how are the robots supposed to distinguish between them? So the idea here is basically to make a kind of invisible QR code that in addition is selective, so that only the robot sees and can identify exactly which QR code it's supposed to look at. I would like to highlight these three persons without whom I could not give this presentation. So Yong, I took the photo from the conference, so he's here actually. He's a postdoc who has made the shells in our lab and has been enormously successful and productive in taking this from an idea to something that actually is where we can demonstrate things. Matthew Schwartz is a friend and colleague since my time in Korea. He is an artist and architect, but working also with robotics engineering. So much of what I know about robotics and self-driving cars I know from Matt, and much of the ideas that I'm presenting here came through discussions with him. And Gabriele Messini, I already introduced you. He's a computer scientist working with security on this secure authentication project. So what I'm saying today is summarized in this article that is coming out anytime in Advanced Materials. It's a progress report where we discuss these two issues as well as a couple of other ones. I don't know what Wiley is doing. It always takes ages for the articles to come out, but I don't know when it's about to appear, but I'm hoping that it comes out soon. So before I go on with the content, I'd just like to say a few words about where I'm from or where I'm working at. Actually, I'm from Sweden, but now I'm in Luxembourg, and this is the University of Luxembourg, the new campus that is being built. And for you who don't know maybe where Luxembourg is, believe it or not, but it's a city as well as a country. It's one of the smallest countries in Europe, really in the middle of Europe, so it's very well connected in that sense. The university is very young. It is just 15 years old. And as you can see, it's also very small. We have just about 6,000 students. But it's been quite successful in raising or creating good research. We have 7 grants from the European Research Council, which are kind of a good quality indicator for European science. And another indicator is that we've done quite well in the rankings. So we're number 179 worldwide in the Times Higher Education. And in the section for young universities, I think it's universities under 50, we are number 11. So that's the university. Back to the science. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of the next stage of application-oriented research that emanated from our initially purely curiosity-driven research that we've been doing since back in 2014. And initially we worked with droplets, and I would like to highlight Irena Dremczyk-Olewicz and Jongin Lo just defended her PhD. She's moving on to a postdoc with Nick now. And she was, during her master thesis, she prepared the first cholesteric droplets, and Irena came to visit us, and together we could, it was a fantastic three-part collaboration where we could explain these patterns that form in collections of cholesteric droplets. And later on, we realized that with shells, you can actually get better optical quality as well as a couple of other interesting effects. And that was largely Young who drove that approach that I would focus on. So just to give you an idea, what do I mean with a shell? With a shell, I mean a thin, typically about a few microns thick layer of liquid crystal that is spherical, and it contains an immiscible isotropic liquid, typically water or water glycerol solution, for instance, and it's also suspended in the same type of isotropic liquid. Depending on what stabilizer you have, you can get the planar or homeotropic or hybrid, and the typical size is maybe a few hundred microns or about 100 microns in diameter. So this is another illustration of what these look like. These are polymerized shells next to a 10-cent European 10-cent coin. So you see they are fairly small. And the nice thing is that because we're using a microfluidic process, they can be produced very, very reproducibly. You see here that these shells all look almost identical. If you look closely, because you see that they're not exactly hexagonally close packed, you see that they all are identical in the sense of a red spot in the middle, but along the perimeter there are also spots, and they are not quite the same everywhere. It depends on the arrangement. So this was a very interesting thing, that you see from each shell, you see a signature of the shell itself, that's a spot in the middle, and then you see a couple of spots around the perimeter that reflect the surrounding, the environment of the shell. And the explanation of these patterns, that's what we did together with Irena when she visited in Korea. So if we start with the central spot, let me see if I can get. So here, this one, this is now a red reflecting cholesteric liquid crystal, so the pitch is on the order of 400 nanometer or something, considering the refractive index. And when you're looking straight down on the middle of the shell, you're looking along the helix, because these are planar aligned shells, so the helix is going to be radial. So you're looking along the helix in the middle, and therefore you see the regular selective reflection that you typically see from cholesterics in the middle. When you look, it's like looking at a flat cell almost. But if you illuminate a little bit further out, then you see that the light that comes in, it's not going to be reflected back up, it's going to be reflected at an angle, and if the angle of incidence is exactly 45 degrees, it's going to be exactly horizontally reflected, and it's going to be reflected back up by the neighbor shell. And that's why we see these patterns that reflect the arrangement of the shell, because they are really driven, they are produced by the neighbors of the shells. And then of course you see that the color is different, because this is Bragg reflection. So if the normal reflection is red, we're going to see these reflections in the green. And then there was a second type of spot that was a bit more difficult to understand, and that has an intermediate color, but yellow in this case. And in this case, because you remember the outer phase, the outside of the liquid crystal, is also water, and on top of the water here is air. So when you know from when you're swimming in the summer and you dive down, you look up, you don't see anything above anymore, you have totally internal reflection. And that's what's happening in this case. So if the total internal reflection happens exactly in between the two shells, you again get this kind of communication that is symmetric and gives you another type of spot. And recently we even realized together with Irena's husband, Romano Rupp, that you can even have a communication that involves three shells. That is quite complicated actually, and that gives rise to these blue spots on the outside. So this is a movie to illustrate what I've just said, that it really works. So in the beginning, I don't know if this has enough contrast to show it. Yeah, yes, I think you see here, right? I'm imagining that you can see here that there's a little line. This is the field aperture, has been closed completely. So we're just illuminating one shell. And that's the one that you're seeing here in the middle. That's the red spot, that is the direct reflection from the shell. But you're also seeing that there are spots around, right? So they are from the surrounding shells. And now when we open the field aperture, you're going to see that more and more spots appear, and that's when the surrounding shells get illuminated, because then they send light to the central shell, so the central shell sends light back up. And you see that you actually have a lot of spots, and that's because thanks to the total internal reflection, you can have a communication over very, very long distances. And you can get quite complex patterns in this way. So the interesting thing was that it turns out that you don't need to have the same pitch. Initially we thought this is only going to work if all the shells have exactly the same pitch, because it's Bragg reflection, right? They have to fulfill the Bragg condition. But it turns out that because of the opening angle of the objective, you actually can have communication also between shells of different pitch. So here we have an example where you have a red reflecting shell communicating with a yellow one in a blue color, and a red in a more cyan color, and a red and an infrared in green, and so on. So depending on which combinations you have, you get different communication colors. And if you introduce a random arrangement of shells of different pitch, you obviously get a very random pattern. So this is quite interesting from a point of view of creating an identification pattern, because by simply preparing shells with a couple of different pitch lengths and throwing them in together in a random arrangement, you immediately get a random arrangement, a random pattern generator. Of course, we're dealing with cholesteric liquid crystals, so in addition you have polarization sensitivity. These are right-handed circular polarized or right-handed helix, so you can easily just turn off and on the reflection. Now, in the most recent study with the shells, we realized that we have to take something into account that is often ignored, and that is that the shells are rarely symmetric, almost never, because you don't have index matching between the water and the liquid crystal. So more common is that gravity simply sends the inner droplet down if it's a bit heavier than the liquid crystal, or up if it's lighter than the liquid crystal. And that means that you get a thin top and a thick bottom, and that has important consequences for the optics. So in this case, we prepared shells with thick top and thin bottom, and we see what we've seen so far. This is the type of picture we've seen so far. This is from the side. So we tilted the microscope 90 degrees, and you see that it's really thicker at the top than at the bottom. But now look what happens when we prepare the shells with an interface that is lighter than the liquid crystal. So the top is thin. We get completely different patterns with rings. And these rings are due to internal reflection within the shell, because now the top is so thin that light can enter. And once it enters, it gets reflected at the bottom, because the bottom is thick. So you have an optical echo chamber. And because it's Bragg reflection, you have several of these paths that each produce one specific, or work for one specific wavelength. And you can have a very large number of reflection paths that all give rise to different rings that with specific colors. And I think a particularly interesting thing with this, that is kind of, it almost bugged me when I saw it the first time, when Jan showed me the movie, is that there is an inversion symmetry here, right? So if you illuminate from the right, because of the internal reflection path, what you're seeing is always on the left. And as an illustration of why this is a little bit counterintuitive, I think this movie is pretty nice. So here, Jung again reduced the field aperture to its minimum. So the white hexagon, that's the field aperture, that's the illuminated area. And this is one shell that is yellow reflecting for normal light that is now illuminated. And here on the left, you don't see it yet, is one that has slightly a longer pitch. And Jung is going to move the shells from left to right. And look at the sequence in which the rings appear and disappear. It's quite counterintuitive, because you probably think that when it goes out of the hexagon, it's going to disappear. But that's not what happens. It disappears on the other side because of this inversion symmetry. So this is, I think, a nice experiment, but also it proves that this is really what is driving, what is the origin of these rings. What is also interesting is that just because you have the thinner top shell, you don't only have these rings, but you can actually see also the other type of reflection. So just by changing focus, you can go from the communication pattern to the ring pattern. So even in one and the same shell, you can get very different types of patterns. Now, one final thing that was quite interesting was that so far we always looked at the shells in the microscope, and you look in reflection, you send down the light vertically more or less, and you look vertically. And then they look, for instance, like this. So this is an arrangement of red reflecting shells, and you see the red color. But then we thought, well, what happens when you look in a different color from the illumination direction? So Jan set up this experiment where he turned off the microscope light and put in an external illumination of 45 degrees instead. And then exactly the same arrangement of shells looks totally different, because now the angle of incidence is different, the angle of communication is different, and these are exactly the same shells. It's exactly the same sample that we're looking at, but it looks totally different. So if you take all these things together, we have some interesting things for making identification tags, because we can combine shells with different pitch in a random arrangement. We can combine shells with different asymmetry, making rings or making communication patterns. We can illuminate them in different ways. We can change the area that is illuminated. We can change the focus. So we get a very complex set of patterns that is determined by this tag. And of course then the question is, well, how do we actually make a tag? Because so far we talk about the liquid crystals. We cannot really just transport them easily. Well, it turns out that you can polymer stabilize these quite easily, and recently Jan even succeeded in polymerizing them completely, so that's a very nice development. But now I just want to show this movie that demonstrates how robust they are when you have polymer stabilized them with just 20% reactive mesogen. So what Jan is doing is he's pushing the cover slip, so compressing the shells. And you see that the central reflection spot increases in area enormously because of the compression. And you also see that the pattern, of course, immediately changes. And when I showed this to Matt, as I mentioned, Matt works with robotics, he said immediately, oh, this solves our problem. Because robotics are really, it's really difficult to get fingerprint tactile sensing with robots. You want robots to be as tactile as we are, and it's very difficult to get small-scale pressure sensing at the tips of the fingerprints. So by using these types of soft shell arrangements and having a camera that just looks at the distortion of the pattern, you could basically get a pressure sensor that is both sensitive in location and in pressure. So that's a quite interesting potential avenue. So let me end by going over to the completely new field, and that is the one on self-driving cars and guiding robots in complex environments. And what we're doing here is we're combining the optics of liquid crystal cholesteric liquid crystal shells, in this case focusing on the central spot. We're not dealing with communication patterns here, but the fact that regardless of in which direction we are looking, we see the same color. And we're combining that with the current technology for motion capture. So probably many of you have seen that for movies like Lord of the Rings and so on, the way these are done is you dress an actor in a special dress that has a lot of these little reflector tags, reflector balls on the body, and then you illuminate the stage with infrared cameras. And the cameras record what these reflector tags are doing, and that way the computer can reproduce the movement of the person. That is used in movies and in a lot of gaming and a lot of different activities. And this is a fantastic method, actually. The way it works, the current solution is like this. You have these beads. They are about 1 centimeter in diameter. and they're covered with the same reflective tags that we have on safety vests and so on, right? So this is a photo taken without flash, and if you take the photo with flash, you see that they really light up very strongly. And if you look at these beads in the microscope, that's what they look like. It's an arrangement of glass beads that are about 20 microns in diameter or something like that. So they're quite small. And because you have a spherical, you put them on a sphere, you get omnidirectional reflectivity. So no matter how you illuminate this, no matter where the actor is pointing or how he moves with respect to the infrared cameras, the camera always sees the reflection. And moreover, it always looks like a sphere, which is also important. So this is a fantastic technology, but of course, and in principle, it would be great for tracking objects also in a complex environment, like a traffic environment, but there is no selectivity here, right? Any light will be reflected, and also, if the background is bright, you might not see the reflection. So the idea here is to use this type of technology, but instead of indiscriminate glass beads, we take cholesteric liquid crystal spheres. And as I mentioned, the key point here is that we use the fact that these red spots, the direct reflection spot here, and of course they don't have to be red, they look exactly the same no matter what direction we are illuminating with which we are looking at the sphere. As long as we are illuminating and looking in the same direction, we always see the same color. And this is nicely demonstrated. This is a microscopy demonstration, but this is the paper published by Merck 3 years ago, where they prepared very, very small cholesteric spheres. And they prepared microscopic samples of this cholesteric. And you see here it's a flat sample, and next to it is a sample with the spheres. And you see that they chose the sample so that the spheres reflect in the blue and the flat cholesteric in the green. And when they look straight on, they have clearly different colors, but when they tilt them, they have the same color. So the nice thing with this spherical shape is that you lose the color, you lose the angle dependence of the color. So you always have exactly the same reflection. So the idea here is that you would replace the glass beads with cholesteric spheres, and you then have a wavelength selectivity, and you would shift to the infrared range so that we don't see them, so they don't disturb the design of the car or whatever that is covered with it, or the building that is covered with it. So these are infrared, these are invisible to us, but the robot that is navigating in this environment can see them. And of course, you also have a circular polarization sensitivity. So you can easily distinguish left-handed from right-handed circular polarization. And in particular, this is important because this means that you can actually cancel out a very busy background. So just as a very simple illustration of this, here is a cholesteric, just a regular flat EHC cell filled with a green reflecting cholesteric. We take a photo through right-handed polarizer on the left, and we see the green color. We take a photo through left-handed polarizer on the right. And now we subtract the picture B from picture A, and you see, of course, that you see the green color is still there, but the background is almost gone. And if you, in addition, replace the green with white, you see you have a very, very strong, very, very high contrast picture. So even in very complex environments, with a lot of other reflections, even in the infrared, can be cancelled out by using the polarization sensitivity. So basically the idea is something like this. You take the kind of QR code concept, but you replace what is white with one infrared reflection with one certain polarization, and you replace what is black with another of a different color or different wavelength. And of course we can do much better because now we can combine any number of wavelengths, and we have two polarizations to play with, so we can do much more complex patterns than just QR codes. And of course there are many other opportunities. So it's not just cars, as I mentioned, but because there are problems, of course, with cars. So what happens when there's fog? What happens when the car gets dirty, and so on? You also, as I showed in the beginning with these robots from Boston Dynamics, you also have indoor applications for this, where you wouldn't have any of these problems. You can also have augmented reality profiting from this. Augmented reality is coming more and more now. Most phone systems are coming with augmented reality apps. And you could then, again, hide invisible QR codes in the environment, on the subway or whatever, and you just raise your phone and your camera, your infrared sensor, this one already has an infrared sensor, so it's already in the phone, will recognize the QR code, and on the display, an augmented reality information shows up based on what you have coded. Because cholesterics are dynamic, they're responsive, you can even imagine dynamic signage. So for instance, in case of a fire, you might want to have a wall suddenly showing up directions where the emergency exit is, or something like that. So temperature-driven response. Shin-Yun Kim recently published a fantastic paper where they had cholesteric droplets inside a polymerized sphere. So the cholesteric droplet was still responsive, but because the outside was polymerized, it was easily processable and stable. So this is certainly possible. And in principle, one might also imagine that you coat windows with these types of spheres that reflect and light in the infrared range for thermal management, with, again, taking advantage of the omnidirectional response. So Albert Schenning and his group has published a paper recently in Advanced Materials on using cholesteric liquid crystals for thermal management. But the problem is really the reflection angle, the angle dependence. So for instance, if you want to cover a car window with infrared reflectors, well, you don't know in which angle the car is going to be parked, and where is the sun actually, in which direction does the sun hit the car window, and so on. So if you would have spherical reflectors, you wouldn't need to bother about that. You have the same reflection wavelength with whichever. So to conclude, I tried to show you that an arrangement of short-pitch cholesteric shells can be very interesting for anti-counterfeiting and secure authentication purposes. We can polymerize or polymer stabilize these shells, and I didn't show it now, but we also demonstrated that we can index match these to a photocurable matrix, so we can really make the tags. We have them. We have made some tags in Luxembourg, and by tuning to the infrared range, we think the cholesterics in spherical shape may be very useful for navigation and robotics by utilizing the technology of motion capture, but making it a little bit more selective than currently. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
We have about 5 minutes for Q&A. It's really good control.